Welcome to Power Women of the Trades podcast. This show is all about breaking barriers and changing the game. Our guests will feature some of today's most successful female entrepreneurs and other advocates of our industry as well. Because if there's one thing we know for sure, female-led entrepreneurship drives change on multiple levels. We want to empower women in the trade industry like you so you can maximize your potential, stay balanced, achieve long-term success, and claim ownership over your life. Let's get started.
Hey, welcome to the Power Women of the Trades podcast with Cassie and Leslie. We are so excited today to have our favorite brand therapist, Dan Antonelli from KickCharge Creative, as our guest today. When Leslie and I started this podcast, we knew that we had to disrupt the market, as Dan always says, and we knew if we needed a logo that we were doing it right from the beginning. And so we started with Dan, and we're so excited that KickCharge is also a sponsor for Power Women of the Trades podcast. So
our very first sponsor.
Yes, our very first sponsor.
Founding sponsor.
Yeah, I think that's great because actually Dan, the OG sponsor, Dan actually introduced sponsorships to us. We didn't even think of that as an option, you know, and Dan was like, hey, we want to be a sponsor. And so welcome to the show, Dan.
What's up, ladies? We should talk about the process of doing the logo design for you ladies for this podcast.
Yeah. We tried to not bring that up in the beginning of this, huh?
Yeah. Like what it was, I think that just throws us right into this, right, Dan? Like probably your day-to-day life is exactly what we went through. And so you're probably often dealing with maybe women who are indecisive. I know in both of my experiences with you, Dan,
I wish we could get screenshots on the video of side conversations we were having and then our group text.
Yeah.
With Dan included.
She'd be
I'd be like, I'm not telling him that. If you want to make that change, you can tell him.
You tell Dan. You know Dan better than me, Cassie. And I'm like, okay, I'll tell Dan we're changing our mind again. But that's the truth. In both of my experiences with KickCharge, I did that because I mean, we could go down this whole rabbit hole, but when Quality rebranded, we made a decision. They were working on finalization. We had a different brand, actually very similar to one that ended up going out. And then I panicked and said, that's not us. We can't do it. Dan, change the brand. We're changing. We're going back to this logo. And he's like, what? And I remember getting the email that he said, I really wish that you would have made this decision 48 hours ago. And I was like,
me too, Dan.
Me too, Dan. Me too.
It's emotional.
It is.
Tell us why it's so emotional.
You know, it's your baby. You've been using it and you get very comfortable with something you've been doing for a really long time. And that's natural. And a lot of owners are very attached to what got them to where they are at that very moment. And then suddenly we're coming in and we're saying we're going to be scrapping all of this and starting over. And certainly there's a lot of pride in what you've built beforehand. But I think the most common attribute of any owner that we've worked with is the idea that they're generally not very complacent people. And so they recognize that what has taken them to this level and this point in time is not actually going to get them to where they want to go in the future. But you have to be sensitive to that. And I don't, I'm not flippant about that. I don't try to really dismiss those true feelings that people have, but on the same time, I'm certainly not emotionally connected to their brand, and so I can be a little bit more objective about it. But you do. In the book, I talk about it being the warm blanket, and that's really a lot of times what they are. So the more important thing is obviously the sooner we can address it, the sooner the company can move on, and it'll just only become more and more expensive later on. Like Cassie, if you imagine rebranding today, what you would have to do, how many things are involved in that, how many new trucks, how much you've grown since that. And so I think sometimes owners keep kicking that can down the road and they're like, I'm going to do that next year. And it's just like every year you wait, it's more expensive, not even in just the things you have to redo, but also the missed opportunities, how it affects culture, how it affects recruitment, how it affects your ad spend. Like all those things are actually costing you money the longer you wait also. So it's easy to be very complacent and comfortable in where you are currently. But when you start trying to look at it a little bit more objectively, that's typically where we see the owners be more open to the idea of change.
I think that was like one of the big things for me, because I remember we rebranded prior to, well, right at COVID. I remember it was like COVID time. And so Oscar and I are like, is this even a smart decision right now? Because we didn't know what was happening with the world. Are we like doomsday right now? And you were like, you can't afford to not rebrand. And I was like, respectfully, you don't know that, and he's like, no, I do know that, And so I remember back then, because he's like, I'm looking at your brand. And it's so funny because whenever KickCharge actually made this like video slider of our old brand on our van, and then it like you slid over, and then there was our new one. And I found that a while back to show someone that I was telling them about Dan, and they were like, oh my God, that was your previous brand? And I'm like, no, I know.
I don't even think I know what it looks like.
It was rough. I mean, it was orange, and it was good. Okay. And that's the crazy part, that it's like so emotional for everybody, even our team, because I remember showing our employees what our new logo would look like. And they were like, no, absolutely not.
Change is hard.
Change is hard.
And that experience actually is very common. And that's why we almost basically tell owners, don't show it to anyone. Like if you're expecting to show it to your entire team and have your team say, oh my God, this is a great idea, we can't wait to rebrand. No, like almost, that almost never happens unless it's truly awful, like where they were coming from. If it's kind of mediocre, then they're not excited about the idea. And frankly, they're worried about change. They don't like change. So I think sometimes, and then that gets in their heads and they're like, oh my God, my whole team doesn't like this, and I have to get them on board with this. Otherwise, it's never going to work. And, it's a very common thing that happens because, they're used to it. It's very comfortable to them as well. Like that's what they've been using and seeing for however long they're working for you.
Do you like when you're working with someone? I know this happens. I've always wanted to ask you this question. Ooh. When you're working with someone actively right now, and they're in like one of the Facebook groups, or they're in whatever, and you're actively working, and they're in that phase where they've got to decide between a couple, because that's part of Dan's. I always tell people, like, if you use Dan, you need to understand that you're not paying for Dan to create you one thing today. Like you're paying for a journey, because Dan's team forces you to go through the journey of why you're changing, what it's going to look like, all of these things. And then he gets you to these steps and some rough drafts, and then you go here. Do you like cringe when someone takes your 3 rough drafts and posts them in like one of these Facebook groups and is like, vote for your favorite one? And you're like, but they're not the owner. Do you kind of like, what do you think?
I think sometimes the challenge with even that is there's no context. So just posting, a couple of examples of, let's say, 2 or 3 different truck wrap options in 3 different genres and styles, you're missing the context as far as, well, what does the competitive landscape look like in that environment? Why do we not have a mascot, or why do we have a mascot? Why did we pick these particular colors for this particular brand? And then also, what is the foundation of the story that will be told moving forward about this particular brand? So you're only really judging it very, very, specifically about the initial aesthetics. And that's kind of like judging a book by its cover without having read the rest of it. So they're not part of the strategy. They're not part of the competitive analysis. So sometimes, I usually don't like clients to post in a public place and ask for a lot of feedback, because it's also people who aren't as astute on branding as we are. So,
and you start seeing them like, no, don't do this, and you're just like, you have.
Well, that's a good segue into, tell us what branding is and what it isn't.
So, I try to describe branding as looking at it from the perspective of a wheel. So if you imagine a wheel, And in the center of that wheel is your logo. So we look at the logo as kind of the hub of your brand. And then the spokes that go outward would be everything that integrates that logo on all your different channels. So your trucks, your uniforms, your collateral, your website, your social media presence, your social media voice, all those things comprise that wheel. Okay. So the reality is if you start with that foundation and then the foundation is not done well, meaning that hub, you can still build a wheel around a sort of crooked hub, but the wheel won't actually be round. And so the wheel still will sort of turn, but it won't be nearly as effective as having a perfect circle, obviously, right? So the idea is build that perfect circle, and then your marketing will work so much better, be that much more effective. And the idea too, that ineffective wheel, if it's done poorly, you can still spin it, but it's going to cost you a lot more money to spin it. And that's really the whole basis of why branding is so important, because if you get it right, your marketing spends should decrease. That's really the whole basis of trying to build a disruptive brand, making it so the brand is sticky in the consumer's mind so that when they're ready for service, they remember you. That's why people even get the idea of even billboards wrong, or they get the idea of their truck wraps wrong. Like, those are brand building exercises. They're not calls to action. Like, if you're putting up a billboard and you're trying to make it so that you expect someone to call you that second as they're driving by because they have an immediate need, maybe that happens once in a while, but it's more about building that name recognition within the community so that when that homeowner is ready for service, they simply type in the name instead of heating repair New Jersey, or, heating repair near me.
So explain in your mind, what is a perfect billboard with one of your brands? I know we don't want a phone number. We want it to be just simple and clean.
Yeah. So brand centric. So really integrating the brand in a large dominant fashion, and then a very simple graphic, and then a simple headline. Like, the fewer the words, the better. So, you see again, like some of these ones out there where, they have web, phone number, huge headline, pieces of equipment, special offers, all these different things. And I'm just like, you try to figure out, like, at 60, 70 miles an hour, how much of that information you can actually process. So even like when we worked on the billboards for Cassie, like, the idea behind that campaign was also establishing empathy within the community. It was about building her brand, but also making a connection about who they are as a company and how that company works within that community. So again, it wasn't even just brand building at that point. It was also helping to establish that empathy. And empathy is like a huge part of building your own brand, because that's also going to affect what people say about your company behind your back, which is another aspect of branding. So branding is, what people say about your company behind your back. That's another way to also look at it. And everything that we do is we try to control what someone believes about your company before you actually get there. And then, of course, once you ring the doorbell and you're in the home and you're providing amazing service, they're going to be left with that impression. But if I can control as much as I possibly can what that homeowner feels about the experience before you arrive, that's really how you win. That's really how you build a much more effective brand. That's how you get higher average tickets. I mean, all those things really go hand in hand, because if I show up and, I got a magnetic sign on my truck and my jeans are all torn, I'm not in a uniform, all those things, Mrs. Jones doesn't really believe that there's a reason why she would ever pay a premium for that particular service. So really trying to imagine it from the perspective of, how can I have that homeowner believe something positive about the experience before you actually arrive? So, it's a little bit like, it reminds me, there's an old song, and it's probably old school, but a song called Subliminal. And to a certain extent, like, that's really what we're doing, is I'm trying to basically really get inside the homeowner's head and have them believe something about the experience before you get there. I mean, that's sort of what branding is also in a nutshell. So every impression that truck leaves, every impression that billboard leaves, what is it saying about the experience? And that's where people also get it wrong, in a sense that they want to do something that's disruptive. So they'll say, I'm going to just make a pink and purple truck with polka dots, and everyone will say they see it. And it's true. Everyone will say they've seen the truck. The problem is what does it say about the experience is the aspect that's missing from that strategy. So the idea is to be as disruptive as possible while still delivering a brand promise that instills the themes like confidence and honesty and trustworthiness, all those things towards Mrs. Jones, who's our ideal avatar.
Well, and I think it's so interesting what you're saying, and what clicks in my head is from an owner perspective, when you're starting a business or running a business or making huge decisions such as changing your brand, is you're always trying to mitigate liability before it even happens. So if you can tell a story of security and safety and create an idea that, because you may think your techs are the best in the world and we always do everything right 100% of the time, you want that to be the thought, because once they get in the house, you really never know what can happen. Mm-hmm. So you're always trying to paint a picture, right? And it kind of gives you a sense of control when you can start your brand out that way from the beginning.
I've seen, it's interesting when people rebrand, and I've been friends with them on social media, and I see them rebrand with Dan, and I think this is maybe something that you see happen a lot as well, where you have this really great brand that you went through the journey with your client, they took your brand, and then they leave with it, and they really never do everything that was possible with the brand. Like from day one, for example, the day we went live with our brand, we threw every old uniform away. If it had an old logo, they weren't allowed to wear it, not touch it, wasn't gym, nothing. Everything was gone. We donated it. We got rid of it. You know, I often see people who have rebranded with Dan, they will still pop up on social media and as the owner in their old logo, or they don't stay consistent. You know, when you rebrand with him, you get the branding guide. My assistant Kaylee's here,
which is amazing.
The branding guide's amazing.
I didn't know existed.
Right,
probably
and you have
6 months ago.
Yes, you have to like live and die by that brand guide. Yeah. Like Kaylee knows when she started working for Quality that her as a marketing assistant, she could do nothing unless it was inside of that brand guide, like fonts, logo or color, the Pantone colors. And so when we got our Power Women of the Trades logo, I was like, Dan, we need that branding guide, because Kaylee, who's also works as the assistant for Power Women of the Trades, she has to have that. Like I have her trained, but I see that happen so often. And I bet that's frustrating for you, because you're like, what are you doing to the brand? But I think that's a big mistake that owners often make, is you have to like rip the Band-Aid off. If you're going to invest in Dan, you got to rip that Band-Aid off and you got to jump all in.
Yeah, it's definitely sometimes frustrating when we've done the van or done the brand, and we've done, let's say for our argument's sake, the first van, and then they have a fleet of other vehicles and their wrap guy says, oh, we can do that for you. You don't need KickCharge to do it. And then I see that stuff posted and it's never done the way we would have done it. And I just always think it's really strange. We just invested like a significant amount of money creating this brand, and then you're already sort of bastardizing the brand at that point. And sometimes it's like just the placement of where things are. Sometimes it's the elements are too small. Like I literally had a person take the same exact artwork from a mid-roof transit and just basically drop it onto a low roof transit and didn't change anything. And it's just like, so like, why did we do this? Or then you'll see them, suddenly introduce a random font to their social media headlines or something like that, or a billboard. And then where did this, color come from? It's not even in your palette. Like, so, we really love when we have the opportunity to continue to work with clients after the rebranding is done, working on billboards, collateral, brochures, whatever we can assist with. But it is frustrating. And sometimes it's just, it seems weird that, again, we made this huge investment and then we're sort of, shortchanging it already from the beginning. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Well, and like, to me, just like you said, you've made the investment. Like I know for us, like Quality had 4 white vans for a month because we were on the schedule to have Dan make them, because I had gone down that before where I would just let the wrap company take the wrap and try to do it. And I sent him a picture and he was like, "What are you doing?" And so I'm like, "Well, I'm in a hurry, Dan, and I don't have time to wait the 2 weeks this time or whatever." And he's like, "No, you have to wait." And so, but I as, Oscar and I as the owner made that decision of, we have to, if we made that investment, we're going to do it. And so I've gone to, workshops and things where I've seen some other brands, and I just feel like that's kind of a common mistake of, your brand is, from that day when you go live with it, you got to do it all
it's your
right.
foundation.
You have to just like rip the Band-Aid off and keep up with everything you agreed to. Like, not because Dan's not going to come and say, "Oh, you can't do that." Because I kept asking him, "Well, am I allowed to do this?" And he was like, "Cassie, you own this like now." And I was like, oh, "Okay." Because I had my brain so wrapped into that Dan owned the brand because he made it. And he was like, "I don't own this." But what that did for me was tricked me into saying, I need Dan to tell me if this looks good or not. Right. But that happens so often, and branding is so crucial. I get video or pictures all the time of our vans popping up or our billboards looking so great or whatever, but it's so consistent.
And you remember when on the billboard, like, you got the sketch from the billboard company. So you said, "Hey, billboard company, here's my logo, make me a billboard." And then they did this design, and then you sent it to me. And then, we talked about why it wasn't working very well. And then we wound up doing it for you. Like, you and I collaborated on that and came up with something really cool together for that. But that's also something you see. And it seems weird that billboard companies, whoever they have as designers, don't seemingly know how to design billboards. It's a little strange, but that happens also like really frequently. And actually, it's funny because billboard design is actually one of my favorite things to do with a brand. Like, I just actually love working in that environment and in that space. But that is what happens. Even you see it happen on digital, like I had somebody whose brand that we just finished work for, a solid web company. But the owner of that web company sent me the proof of it. And I had like 15 things like, "Hey, this is the wrong shade here. This is the wrong use of the logo here. The mascot's facing the wrong way," like things like that. So in as much as you can make sure every single touch point remains consistent, that's really a critical component of it for sure.
Do you only do major overhauls, or do you ever find that you have people who have a pretty good, decent brand? They don't want to totally change everything because there's already brand recognition, but that they may have 20 in their fleet that they just want to tweak. And what is the process like for that?
Sometimes you do have to examine what equity they have. Like, so is there anything of value that they've been doing that we can salvage or that we can bring into the next? So it's more like a evolution rather than a complete revolution. Like, for example, in Cassie's case, we knew that the orange actually was a really, really important part of her branding. And we also knew that within her market that she had there weren't any other people really using a lot of orange. So he's like, well, we definitely want to carry that through. And then she had the idea of using a Q that was in like a weird kind of, I don't know what we described that. Like, it was like a shape, right? There was like a Q there. So like, maybe we can build off the idea of having the Q be central to the logo moving forward. So we look at that. You definitely don't just immediately dismiss that. But I think a lot of times owners overestimate how much actual equity that they really have in their own branding. And because they're very close to it as well. So we asked a question on our brief, like, if you were to poll 100 shoppers in the local supermarket, how many would say they had seen your logo or your truck? And you see some people where they're like 90 out of 100. And I'm just like, there's no way, especially the people running around in white vans.
Well, they can't be objective. Yeah, they can't be objective.
What's funny to me about that is being on this side of that journey with you. We rebranded. Our brand will be 3 years old in May. May of 2020 is when we rebranded. And we had like, I can't remember how many, 5 or 6 trucks. We were doing like $3 million a year. And now, we're budgeted for 2023 to do $11 million. And it's incredible, right? But so let's think about like how that growth through there. But I remember you asking me those questions, and I was so serious of like, Dan, I have to have the orange. We have to have this. And especially in our town, I knew that in our town, because we live in a small community and I went to high school there and all of those things. In our town, I did think that the majority of everyone knew us there, right? But if I were to go back 3 years and you were to ask me that question and I could be more realistic, I could have literally gone to any color. I didn't have to stay with orange. We could have gone to any logo. We didn't want to change our name because that felt like stressful. But I feel like if I went back, now, because I've seen the growth and what the brand did for us, the brand helped us grow. Absolutely. But the brand just showed up when we showed up with it. So it could have been anything. So how committed I was to that orange, and
because you had a plan for the brand, whereas before I didn't have no plan.
And so I think, anyone listening who's maybe considering this, if you go in and you're not, maybe if you're at 10 million already and you're rebranding, I think maybe the conversation is a little different. You still have the opportunity. And I think like Lee, Tom Howard's company, I think that's a good example of how disruptive the change was there. And they were well over that threshold, I would imagine, So you can definitely change at those higher revenues.
It's just maybe a different conversation, different
it's a
process,
different conversation,
different timeline.
But if you're under 3 million, 2 million and under, you don't have the grip on the market like you think you do. Just respect. That's the truth.
Right.
And I remember thinking, like, he would say, well, you probably really don't have that much ownership of the market. And I was like, yes, we do, Dan. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. You don't know Oklahoma. And I said all the things to him that he was
used to hearing.
But if I go back, and I love the orange, I wouldn't go back from it at all. But I will tell you, our logo has like 6 colors in it. Actually, it's a 12 color print. So sometimes I'm like, whew, on the getting that printed, right? But our logo has like a teal in it. And you just commented on that yesterday. We started using that teal. Well, I wouldn't allow it before because it's not the orange, but it is in our logo. So why aren't we using it? And so you can be more creative and not get yourself stuck, especially when you are just now entering your growth phase.
And maybe I'm wrong. You just couldn't tell me any different. So I'm like, would we just have to change it all? Like, would the truck just be you know what I'm saying? Like, this is a real thing that I think about, because I can be objective and say I do like our brand. And now I'm on this side of it for, 4 years. It's not as clean and fresh as I like, but
it has a lot of potential.
Competitive analysis, we're still the best in Oklahoma City. So I'm like, is it worth it at this point for me? And again, this is just me. This is not, I probably wouldn't want to say this.
Yeah,
on the
Rita,
show.
She doesn't want to put that part in there.
Is like, that's a big change. And I'm like, would it be, are people still going to recognize because we do get, hey, we saw your van today. We saw your van today, or the billboard. And I'm like, and I love it. I do. I love what we've created, but I also know when we add heating and cooling, it's going to probably change how it looks on that truck wrap a little bit. It would change the logo too, because it'd be Champion Plumbing.
Well, and we want to get back to the podcast, but that's a good question for her, Dan. And again, Rita, we'll just tell her the second video or the second.
Well, because here's what I'm saying. Like, even as we're talking about this, I never had a plan. I didn't know that. Now, I know when we started out, we wanted to use you, but we couldn't afford to. So we went with our next best option, and we were super excited, still happy with it. There was no plan for me. Everything was me I didn't get a brand guide. I didn't even know what that was. That's when I say we talked about it 6 months ago. I really didn't know. And I'm kind of with it on a few things, not everything, but as far as marketing and wanting to be consistent, and we've done a really good job. We have the broken hub, right? We just do really well, like on the other verticals that we can. But there is going to be a potential that we'll be adding HVAC, and sooner rather than later. So I've been having this conversation with Prolific, and I'm like, can you tell me, we just want to add heating and cooling? Or are we going to have to are we going to have to rewrap? Because that's another expense I have to look at. Okay. Because right now we know when we buy a van, we roll the wrap into it. It's not really you don't take it out of your capital, but there's a lot of elements to that. So that was me asking more from, okay, is it a smart thing to do or not a smart thing to do at this point?
Yeah. In your case, you have such a strong foundation that it is definitely more evolutionary than revolutionary. There's so much of what you have that was done well. There's bits of it that can be improved.
And I hate even saying that because I do think there were parts done well. But I never got a plan. There was never, anytime there was a billboard design, there wasn't anyone I could ask.
And technically,
you know what I mean?
Let's go.
I would have loved to have had someone saying, hey, be more consistent here. Here's the font that you can use. Because I can work really well within requirements and lists.
Can you and then let's get back to it. But can she at this point, I guess I say legally, I guess so. Can she hire you and you just revamp her logo? Is that allowed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know what's allowed.
She owns it. Yeah, she owns her artwork. She can do whatever she wants.
Because I was like, it's prolific.
Okay.
So that's
I probably wouldn't put it in our portfolio because we didn't create the origins of it, but we could certainly tighten it up and make it better. Absolutely. And that would just be, something from a pricing perspective would be obviously a lot different than the normal process that we go through. That would just be.
And then he can get you ready to add the heat and air.
Well, I think it would just be around that same time frame.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like that would be a more natural flow than trying to do it now. And then going to add heating and cooling later.
Yeah, and then I still don't think you would have to immediately rewrap all the vans because you would be still in the same family.
I would have loved to have had a plan. I love a plan.
Well, that's a good example of you.
I love a plan for anything in my life. And so I think what I want to say on the episode, and I feel like I can't, is you can find other people to do a graphic design for you, but they may not give you a plan. So when you're later on trying to grow and add billboards, you're going to be doing that all on your own.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be consistent.
Let's pull back in, but I think that
I can't say that.
I know she doesn't want to say all that because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. And Rita, on the second thing, we're taking that out. But I think that goes to show how we can somehow
I would like to say that
you get what you pay for.
Well,
but you tried, but you didn't know. You didn't know anybody.
You didn't know anybody. I didn't know there was a plan. It was more like, here's your graphic design and you're on your way and you bought a product. You buy bread off the shelf. It wasn't an ongoing relationship where you can keep consistent on your channels. And branding is really important to us in our community. I mean, that's through social media, digital PR or whatever.
So you said you wanted to segue back into the brand catalyst. What did you say?
Yeah, just, because we could talk a little bit about sort of how that reflects back to our philosophy in terms of viewing our work as having the ability to change lives. So the rebranding, I don't want to take words out of your mouth, but I feel like that probably changed your life to a fairly significant manner, but not just that piece. Obviously you did a lot of other things, investment in infrastructure, Service Titan, all these things that you went along with that. But the fact is, I saw Ken Goodrich post the other day on his employee appreciation day that they have 1,200 employees. When I rebranded them, they had maybe 50, if that. So does he have 1,200 employees because of me? No, it's not 100% because of me, but certainly I played a role in what they became. I sort of, so the idea of just branding becoming a very, very positive catalyst for change. You can even see what Matt Pistoian and what's happening with his company at AC Plus and he's crushing it since his rebranding. And I even said to him too, I was like, is your dad stoked with this? Because his dad was the reason why he didn't want to rebrand all these years. His dad didn't want to rebrand, and now he took over the helm. He bought the company from his dad, and his dad's got to be sitting back and watching this thing explode, thinking, oh my God, I hope he's proud of him. And he said he was, but I just think to a certain extent he's got to feel like
he had to feel so validated after that. I can only imagine that was probably a long time battle for him. It
looks so good. That brand looks so good. And it makes me think too, and maybe it wasn't him. I can't remember. Was it him that he had booked you and then canceled?
I think he did book us and then cancel. Yeah.
And then maybe the dad was still involved. There's a few stories like that of people booking, panicking and backing out, and then going ahead and going forward with it in a couple of years. And then you see it like catapult into this amazing thing. And you're like, well, hell, why didn't I do that?
Well, and when is the right time? Can you talk about timing?
Yeah. We can talk about timing, but it's like I wish everybody that started a home service company read my book as their first step before even starting the company, because you would avoid so many errors and so many mistakes, whether it's naming, whether it's just figuring out how to do an effective truck wrap. But, that's why I wrote the book. I mean, you certainly don't write a book because you're going to make any money from it, because I can assure you that's not going to happen.
Plug the book.
What's the name of the book?
What's the name of the book?
It's Branded, Not Blanded.
Branded,
We'll have to add a link.
So
there we go.
I know that people are reading that book because our billboard campaign was featured in the book. And I know people are reading it because I've probably had like 12 people reach out specifically. And I don't even know that I've shared that with you to talk to about the billboards. I actually have 2 people coming to do on-sites at Quality because they read your book and wanted to come and see Quality. And that's funny.
You're doing events now. I had no idea.
We always joke if we're going to start on sites. This isn't on site. No, I think that's interesting to me, though, that it kind of makes me giggle a little bit because, I still have those days of like imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know how to run a business. I just paid a guy and got a brand.
What are we doing?
It really is a journey that you have to be, as the owner, you have to be committed in. Because like you said with Ken Goodrich, you didn't create those 1,200 jobs, but you were definitely a tool that helped create those 1,200 jobs. And you had a place there, and you didn't help us grow from 3 to 11, but you were absolutely the tool that catapulted us to have the knowledge to do that. Mm-hmm. And what do you think about like recruiting and branding? Because I feel like people like to work for a place that looks good.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you see owners post online, I can't find anyone who wants to work here. And if you dig deeper, a lot of times it's obvious why no one wants to work there. Like, it doesn't look like a place I want to work there. Like walk into Tommy Mello's office. Do you think Tommy Mello has the same recruitment problems that some other companies have? No, because it looks like an amazing atmosphere, an amazing culture. Ken Goodrich's office in Vegas is just amazing when you walk through that space. You're in a place that's a premium provider of service. So you have to look again inwardly, but certainly one of the big things that I think we see is people hire us initially because they want a rebrand and they want a cool wrap design, and they sort of come to us with that as their primary objective. And then they learn afterwards what the real benefits are. It's not just the pretty logo and the pretty truck wrap design. It's how did this affect culture? How did it affect recruitment? How did it affect average tickets? Like, all those things are other benefits, but a lot of people don't come to us and say, Dan, we want you to rebrand because we want to increase our average tickets. That's usually not why they start that conversation, but certainly they realize later what a huge catalyst for growth and change that rebranding has become. And I think that's sometimes the difference too, when people come to us and you sort of know a little bit about their objectives when they say, I just want a logo and a truck wrap. And I'm like, well, if you want just a logo and a truck wrap, like, we may not be the right people for that. Like, you could probably get that a hell of a lot cheaper somewhere else. But if you want a brand, that's a whole different objective. That's a whole different thing that we provide. And that is what makes us different. So even just educating people on sort of the differences between what it is they really need. If you simply just want a pretty logo and a truck wrap, yeah, we can do it. But I think if you look at really what the actual benefits of that, it's a much different deliverable. And I think the other thing too is people, I think, initially think that oh my God, you guys are so expensive. But I think anyone that's gone through the process after always tells us, oh my God, you guys should double your prices. Like, you're giving away so much. Like, you should charge so much more for your work.
Well, you probably should. And because I agree with that, because you help. And if, as the owner, if you're willing to listen and you're willing to understand and you're willing to know and like try what he's telling you and not just do all the same crap that you've done before, you have a real opportunity to grow. And I just wrote down, because thinking about like, you are what you consume, right? So like if you, in the differences of like the shops that you go into, I was at a training once that someone was talking about how their owner smokes in the office. I like would die. I would literally die. Like I would like what, like, you know, like those behaviors, like we don't allow our techs to smoke in their vans or at a customer's house. And like, I even offered like, I would really actually like you to not smoke, you know, but those I'll help you get off nicotine. Yeah. But you are what you consume. Like from the moment that you come to our business, and we really modeled this after other places that have branded with Dan, of there at the front door, when you walk in, the wall's orange, our brand's right there. It's all over the office. Our uniforms represent who we are. We are constantly reminding like what your uniform looks like, what the belt is supposed to look like. But all of that's a part of the story of who we are. But that comes with like in our recruiting, like when I've talked to people, they're like, I want to work for you because I feel like you have a secure business. I'm not going to have to worry about calls.
The perception is because we have invested in our business with our brand, our uniforms, our culture, our building, everything, is that there is a sense of stability and security for your team.
Yes. And in our trades and the trades in general, for years, it was these dudes in a truck with maybe one helper and in overalls and you know, and like they didn't have that. And so to change the perception and to change the conversation of our industries, Dan and KickCharge, there's a reason why you're known, Dan, all over the country, because you've taken these trades and you've changed what trades look like, not just like physically like but like you've shown this how to create. I got goosebumps, like how to create. You've changed lives. That's changed
because lives. This is all I can think about is you talking about, what did we say? You were a brand therapist, but it's also brand health provider. So it's not a one-time transaction, right? That's why, and to be fair, when these guys are coming out of trucks or these women, they're wearing all the hats. They're thinking, okay, now I just need a van. You can't even discuss culture yet because it doesn't translate. They're just trying to get their truck wrapped and make it noticeable and disruptive. To think long term into how is this going to impact other avenues of marketing or PR or whatever, their brain isn't even there yet. So you have to overcome that for them because they're not thinking long term. And it is hard. Like when you're coming out of a truck, I can speak from experience. I would have been like, just give us our logo. Like,
just give us a logo.
Let us, help us. And it isn't until now on this side of it, I see, gosh, it's kind of a support system for all these other areas that are part of your branding, which is what you guys provide that could be different than maybe somebody else.
Yeah. And like you said, being unremarkable in your branding, you know, there's a famous quote from Roy Williams that says, you know, being unremarkable is the tax you spend, or overspending on advertising is this tax you spend for being unremarkable, right? So that's actually the quote. And again, you know, there's a lot of really, really big companies and a lot of people are really, really intimidated by some of these Goliaths in some of these markets. The real irony about some of that is a lot of these Goliaths actually have really poor brands. And so I like opportunities in those environments because I know that I can build a better brand than some of the biggest companies in that space. And we can make that branding work smarter and have more impact than some of these big companies. Like some of these big companies, you could look at them and you'd be hard pressed to even identify what their actual promise is, what their actual story is. And how do they overcome that? They just bang a ton of money. They're the 10, the 12, the 13% spenders on advertising. And they have to, because there's nothing, you know, no empathy in that brand, right? So we just talked before about the idea of empathy. There's nothing there. And it's always ironic to me that some of these big companies, I think Gettle is probably the best branded large company in the nation. You know, if I look at that, I think Tommy Mello is also, again, one of the nicest large company brands, but there's a lot of big companies with really awful brands. And how do they get there? Again, just that complacency. that complacency, never wanting to change. And then the irony that you see also with the PE owned companies is that the guys in PE, they don't want to rock the boat. They're not going to say, hey, let's change the logo now that we're at 50 million. That seems like a really smart idea. Like no one's going to put themselves out. So they just keep perpetuating it. So that just leaves an opportunity, I think, for the smaller companies to start taking pieces of that business while they sit there and are very complacent in those sterile and stale brands that they keep putting out there.
Yeah. I think that's crazy.
I feel like we could talk about this all day.
I think so. I could talk branding all day too. And I get all my passion from Dan.
But then I can't really say anything, but I want to talk about it all day.
Yeah. I just am like, it's funny because Kaylee and I were driving through Oklahoma City earlier and she said, now that I'm so focused on brands all the time, like I see other people's brands, like other industries. And she said, I just think like, what were they thinking? And
were you thinking of all the billboards you saw on your way to Oklahoma City about branding?
No, yeah, some of those. But then I saw like, just like lawyers down the road.
Ugh,
and that's
personal injury lawyers.
All of them are just like a really small.
That could be your new niche. Probably make a lot of money in that market.
Well, Dan, it was super nice to have you on. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me in this is, if just like you said, like any new owner or someone, even if you're not just brand new going out, you need to buy the book, read the book, and just like read it again. And that can Let's do that. Let's do a book giveaway.
Rita, make this happen.
Rita, we will get that happen. We'll get maybe everyone who listens and gets to this point in the podcast can fill out a link.
Google.
And then
I bet we could do a Google form.
A Google form. We're talking above our knowledge. Our team will handle that for us. And let's give away 10 of Dan's books on
I
us.
Love that.
So,
on us.
Because I just think again, you just really have to really like soak it in, let it sink in, and have an open mind. And you're probably wrong. And it's okay.
And you need a plan for everything. You need a plan for your brand.
You do.
Awesome. That's a great idea. Happy to supply you guys with 10 books and that'll be awesome. Hey, we can help so many people avoid so many mistakes just by reading the book. So I'm excited to help with that.
For sure. Well, Dan, thank you for being on. Thank you for being a sponsor for Power Women of the Trades, our original sponsor,
our first encourager,
in our space, and just thank you for being an advocate for women in the trades. And we can't wait to have you on again. And definitely, we want to have Terry too. I think that would be amazing to have her on as well. So,
well, I think it's amazing what you ladies are doing. We're proud to be a part of it. I think it's such an exciting time for women in the trades. And I'm just so happy you guys are basically cheerleading for everybody and helping everybody really see the potential. I was actually talking to my young daughter who is 15 and she's a little unsure of really where she wants to go. And I was saying, there's a lot of other things you can do if you don't want to go to college, and that's okay. And I was telling her about some of the stuff that some of these women I know are doing in the trades, and I was trying to inspire her. So I think it's just awesome that you guys are inspiring, hopefully, a whole new generation of people within the trades. So great job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, have a good one.
All right. Take care.
Bye, Dan.
This has been Power Women of the Trades. Like what you hear so far? Leave us a review at Apple. And make sure to listen to our other episodes wherever you enjoy listening to your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.